Well, friends, it would appear as though the not so much Mormon anymore and not even so much wifey anymore TikTok influencer Frankie. I knew as soon as it just rolled off the tongue incorrectly. Okay. Well, guys, it would appear as though America's favorite not so sweetheart, Frankie Taylor Thomas. Oh, God, that's why? The three white boy name. Like, white boys don't even do this anymore. Why? I just don't get it. Okay, so Taylor is first. Taylor, Frankie, Paul. Okay, and it's not her husband, the boyfriend or baby daddy, right? She calls him Dakota. What's his last name? Nobody cares. Girl, dang, yikes. Um, what about Taykota? Taykota, is that a thing? It is now. Well, friends, it would appear as though America's least favorite toxic twosome Taykota is back in the news, and they are currently making all of us feel much better about all of our previously failed relationships. So what's going on? Now, as I'm sure most of you know, this recent troubling news all began because of a March 19th release of a tape, a cell phone recording from that August 2023 incident. This incident was, of course, depicting DV, and the cops were called by the neighbors, and it was an incident in which Taylor was the aggressor. And so, of course, the internet was on fire. And there was a lot of condoning, there was a lot of condemning. There's some of the messages were spot on and even hopeful and uplifting, and then some of the messages were downright alarming. But there's one conversation that I kept waiting to read or hear about or see a YouTuber, a podcaster, really going on a deep dive and dissecting. And to me, it was it was my central interest. We can say that. I can't call it the interest of everyone, or even say that it was the most important aspect of this case, because, of course, the culture war that we now know as the gender wars just exploded with lots of back and forth, and that is not a war that I participate in or care for. It's certainly not helpful. But this one aspect of this story, it was heartbreaking and fascinating, and I just couldn't believe that no one, or at least that I've seen, maybe there have been, sure, absolutely, I don't watch everything or read everything, but I have yet to see it. And so, naturally, even though I hadn't initially planned on talking about this incident at all, well, somebody needs to talk about what needs to be said. So welcome back to Justice for All. We're going to kick things off with a story here tonight, because we here at Justice for All know that stories and storytelling are ways that we get to know ourselves on a deeper level, and thus we get to know one another in life, in the world around us on a deeper level. We'll make it a quick one. A few years ago, I was talking to a lady friend of mine, and she starts telling me in this kind of nervous tone about problems she's been having with her son's behavior, his tone, and his word choices. And I ask her, how long has this been going on? What's happening at school? What are his friends and peers? What's that situation like? She tells me I can't really find anything that's going on. I don't understand. I've even talked to the school nurse and the counselor there. I took him for a psych evaluation. I can't understand. I said, okay, well, I happen to know that her and the boyfriend, the dad, had quite a rough time for the first few years after the child was born. And so I asked her, is there an incident that happened recently that's got you so rattled right now? I could tell she was off while we were talking. Her hands were shaking. And she says, well, yeah, the other night I asked him to get cleaned up for dinner, and he ignored me, which has been happening a lot lately. So I waited a minute, then I asked him again. He was playing his video game, not listening. I know he can hear me. And so finally, I went over for a third time. I said his name and commanded him to go get cleaned up for dinner and turn on his video games off. And he stands up, he throws his controller at the television, turns around, screams, "F you, Mom," runs to his room and slams the door so hard the walls shake. And I say, okay. And I just look at her and I say, do you ever remember a time during the early years of his life when you and Dad used words like that? Pitches, that tone of voice, anger? Do you ever remember a time when there was slamming of doors so hard the walls may have shaking? And she said, well, yeah, I've told you all about that, and, that happened, but he was 1, he was 3, he was 4, and sometimes, he was in his room when we were doing that. We got into counseling and took care of all of that before he could remember any of it. And I said, may I offer a hypothesis? Yeah, that's why I came to you. I said, well, young parents often make this mistake because nobody knows to tell them how they should be acting during this time. He doesn't remember consciously because his conscious mind isn't online yet. But his subconscious mind is, and that is where his emotions and his patterns and behaviors, all of the information that's getting pulled in and stored from his environment, from the voices, the tonal pitches, the emotion, the anger, the words themselves, are all coming in, implanting into these cyclical patterns that will dictate his behavior later on. And he won't even know where it came from because it's coming from his subconscious mind, which was programmed before he even went to kindergarten. I could see her bottom lip start to quiver, and I said, wait. She said, I'm such a terrible mother. Oh my God, what is... And I said, no. You're not a terrible mother. You're not a terrible person. You didn't know. This is a fault of our society, not yours, because we fail to inform young parents on how to care for their children's burgeoning psyche in those early years. And that needs to change. His conscious mind doesn't remember, you're right, but it's not his conscious mind that is controlling to and leading his behavior, especially his automatic reactive behavior. That's his subconscious mind. And she just kind of looked at me. And I said, so he was around for a lot of this? Yeah. Did he hear the husband saying these things to you? She said, yeah. Sometimes he was even right here on my hip. I said, okay. And she started to cry and saying, I'm the worst mother in the world. And I said, you're not the worst mother in the world. And this is not hopeless. There are things we can do. Because you programmed your son to say this. Your husband programmed your son to react this way, unbeknownst to the two of you. I'm going to deprogram him and reprogram him for a new, different behavior, one that's more appropriate of a well-behaved child of his intelligence and his age. And that's what we did. Now, prior to March 19th, I had never heard of the name of Taylor Frankie Paul. Nor had I heard the name Dakota Mortensen. And the show, the Secret Lives of Mormon Wives. Got it. Why can't they just be Real Housewives of Mormontown or something like everybody else? Why does it got to be all this? The Secret Lives of Mormon Wives. It was a show and a title that I had obviously only heard of vaguely. I knew that it was a show in like Real Housewives of wherever. It was just something that I knew was part of the zeitgeist. And that's it. That's all I knew. And I mean, obviously, I'm not a reality television guy. And I mean, no offense to anyone. I'm assuming that if you clicked on this video, you are a fan or at least have heard of this. I mean, no offense by this because I can't. I deal with reality TV-esque drama all day in my career, and I just don't have the capacity to watch this stuff when I get home. I barely have the capacity to deal with my own secret life and everything that comes with that. So yeah, clearly I don't know a whole lot. And so I had to go look and do some research because when the video dropped, I, like most people, found it to be quite alarming and disturbing. And I'm not saying this to impart any type of judgment on these people one way or the other. And I know, as I mentioned previously, there has been the culture war has reared its ugly head here, and we've got team this one and team that one, and I just don't care about doing that. I don't find it helpful. And when it comes to Taykota, I will lovingly only be team children. I'm team children in any case where there is a negative or harmful environment that children are a part of, either by proxy or within the environment themselves. Period. That's just it. And again, that's not to impart judgment on these people one way or the other, because people are complicated, people are flawed, people have problems, people have issues. Some of them are very deep. Some of them are directly their faults. Some of them are not. A lot of it is passed down. But what took place on that video is something that is worth discussing in the consciousness of the collective, in the zeitgeist, in these conversations that we have. And within social media, as I stated previously, I was looking for one particular conversation to come up because I wanted to see what people were saying about it, where people were at with this type of thing, what people were thinking about it. It's important for me, as a human being, it's important for me as a man in this world, it's important for me as a member of the conscious collective, and it's important for me as a practitioner to know how people feel about these things. Where are people as far as their evolutionary and conscious progression? Where are we at collectively? How do we look at these things? How do we react? And so I found a lot of the talk online to be informative and beneficial and to reflect progression, where we as a species have moved forward on this collective dial and the ride that we're all on together. And then, of course, some of it was questionable. Some of it was alarming. But the one area that I was looking for, I hadn't yet seen. And that, of course, comes from one specific moment in that video that moved me the most. Courtesy of the vultures the employees over at TMZ, we received this leaked video of this event from August of 2023, where the neighbors heard a scuffle, assumed it was a DV case, called the cops. The cops showed up, and Taykota answered the door. Now, the video, this specific video, was one that Dakota had recorded himself, and then, of course, it was later surmised that he leaked it, and that leak was calculated, and, all the other drama. Did he? Probably. We don't know yet. Maybe we do. I don't know. It's not my concern. Within that video, we see Ms. Paul launching into an all-out attack on him. And he was recording, and he's saying some, questionable things like, look, see, here is what this is called physical abuse, and this is what you do to me, and yes, that's questionable. But what happens later in the video, she starts to pick up these bar stools and starts launching them quite literally at his head. The one comes over, he blocks it, he grows more irate. The second one comes through. And then at 48 seconds in the video, a third bar stool comes at him, and he steps forward and he blocks it with his hand, and it goes down and to the right. And that's when the small, muffled cry of a young child fills the room. And it's heartbreaking. And as the fight continues, Ms. Paul becomes even more irate and screaming, and the child, her voice raises up as well. And, even though TMZ did, of course, give us the little hint by having their red arrow and saying Taylor's daughter was over here, it's so dark, she could be in the corner way over there, we don't really know because you can't really tell. Until that cry came out. And that cry, which only escalates as the mother's voice escalates, gets even more consumed with pain and confusion and fear. Until finally, when all hell is breaking loose and the camera isn't even situated anymore and it's all black, and you hear that tiny voice yelp out with pain and sorrow and heartache as she cries out, "Mommy." Yet we don't see or hear Mommy coming to her aid, coming to console her, coming to pick her up, caress her, hold her, care for her, see if she's okay. We hear Mommy in the background continuing on what she's doing. Later on in the cops footage that comes up, the young police officer, who I have to say, considering with what he dealt with, handled the scene mostly in a stellar fashion. Even at one point, he doesn't know that kids are even there. And you can even see, or can't really see it much, but you can hear his reaction as they mention the kids upstairs. And he stops and says, wait, there's kids here? Right? And then it dawns on him like he never even asked or went to look because he was too busy invested with this whole mess of these two so-called adults down in the living area. But later on, that same cop, he's at the truck talking to Dakota, and he makes, a reference. He's quite knowing for a police officer. I don't mean to say that police officers aren't knowing, just saying like he's talking in a very intelligent way about what happens with these things and how things look in an extended view. And he's referencing that, hey, this is very serious for these children. This child is going to be in therapy for a long time. Now, why did that cop say that? How did that cop know that? Why is this child going to be in therapy, an extended form of mental and emotional health, for this one physical altercation that happened in this one night? Why do we all talk about this and make jokes about our childhood and our inner child and having mommy issues and daddy issues and being in therapy because of our parents? Where does all of this come from? We seem to have that conversation, but we're not having the all-important conversation of what exactly is happening to this child, to us, to our children. What is happening that ends up with children and teenagers, young adults, and adults all the way up until the day of their passing having struggles with mental and emotional health, so far as that they have to call a professional to come in and help, which is not, by the way, a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength. Just saying. And so I didn't see this conversation happening, and I wanted it to happen because I think it is important that we, as a collective, we, as a social group, as a society, as a progressive organism that's trying to move forward in a collective manner, in some fashion of health, total health, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, that we start having deeper conversations about what we are doing to each other and what we are doing to our children and why it matters now, possibly more than ever. So, I know the conversation has probably started elsewhere that I haven't seen, but I figured I would do my part because I think there's something that we can learn from this, a conversation that we're not having. So let's dive in. The subconscious mind in children doesn't just observe behavior, they internalize meaning. And so when a parent figure, it could be the mom or the dad or a step-parent, foster parent even, but when that authority figure yells, degrades, or creates some other level of emotional instability, the child doesn't blame the parent. They blame themselves. Because, see, it is the conscious mind that uses logic and reason and rationality to make sense of and understand and filter through right answers and wrong answers and certain perspectives of how and what people in relationships should not be, how people should not act, what's happening, what's being said, what's not being said. And so there's no filtering through that because there's no conscious mind at work. It's all subconscious mind taking in, creating patterns, creating ideas, creating what will later turn into behavior, creating the under rules that will govern how an individual speaks and acts. The subconscious narrative in such a situation where there is emotional instability, there is chaos, that narrative becomes, I must be the problem. I'm at fault. I'm not safe. I need to be hyper-aware just to be able to survive. This, of course, is where anxiety is born. This is where people-pleasing is born. This is where that deep sadness and that dark depression that later in life you just can't understand why, when I have everything on paper, do I feel this seemingly incurable melancholy. This is where the false self begins to form and then inform. But not as a choice, as a survival strategy. Any parent out there can tell you that a child's nervous system is incredibly sensitive, and when exposed to chaotic situations and emotional volatility, it enters into a state of chronic stress. And when that sensitive nervous system goes into the state of chronic stress, when something is what did we say before? Consistent emotional intensity, consistently repeating, there is a response there. And today, we know that response as fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. But what happens with those sensitivities and those responses when we're children? What is a child in the middle of a chaotic fight when bar stools are going over like grenade launcher? What is the child going to do? Fight or flight? Was the child going to go up and be like, Mom, put up your dukes? What is, flight? What is the child? Where's it going to go? Is it going to run down the street into the darkness? Is it going to jack the car keys and drive off and go get a job at Costco and get a studio apartment in the city? Like, what are we talking about here? But freezing and fawning. Are we seeing that here in this video, in this response? And so in these situations, when a child cannot fight, when a child cannot run away, they may freeze. And then over time, in repeated behavior, they will adapt. Not because they want to, but because they feel as though they have to in order to survive. They become quiet, they become hyper-observant, they become emotionally withdrawn, or perhaps overly accommodating. And of course, over time, weeks, months, years, this state becomes their baseline. What should feel abnormal, what should feel chaotic, what should be known as red alert, what should be completely abnormal has now became their everyday normality, their baseline. There are some wounds that never bleed, no bruises, no broken bones, but they shape a child's mind just the same. And so we're not just talking about DV, we're not just talking about the physical violence portrayed in a video. We're talking about what happens inside of a child's mind, inside of the psyche of a developing child when the world around them becomes unpredictable, unsafe, and emotionally unstable. There is a story beneath the surface with that child. There's an entire world that is being shaped and formed and molded within the subconscious mind of that child. And this is what chaos teaches a child. From the day a child is born up through 7 years old, that child operates primarily in a subconscious brain state. This means that they are not filtering, they're not questioning, they're not analyzing what they see. They're encoding it. Because that's what the subconscious mind does. It operates differently than the conscious mind. It doesn't use reason and rationale. It doesn't use logic. That's the conscious mind, which doesn't develop or begin coming online until that time of 5, 6, 7. So that entire time, from really before birth, through the birthing process, and into those early stages of childhood, that subconscious mind is trying to build out the programs that it will use to understand people and the world around them that they live in. Every tone of voice, every emotional outburst, every moment of tension becomes part of that program, becomes part of that internal blueprint for what life actually is as it unfolds around them. So when a child like Indy, who was 5 when this event happened, for a child like that who's exposed to verbal and emotional abuse, she isn't thinking, oh wow, Mom is really angry tonight and she is incredibly dysregulated. Maybe we should call a therapist or get some help in here because this inept man over here seems to be ill-equipped to handle such an outrageous event. Maybe I should, trot off upstairs and let these two settle their differences amicably or not. No. This child isn't sitting there thinking, oh, this is unhealthy. Maybe we should discuss this like adults, like the adult I am not. And clearly no one else around here seems to be either. No, instead, she's taking in what is happening. This is somebody that's not my dad, but that is now with Mom. So is this what love looks like? Is this what relationships feel like? Is this what is normal when you get upset within close interpersonal relationships? This is my mom. This is my example of what it is to be a woman in the world. So this is how I should handle my feelings. This is how I should react when things don't go my way. This is how I should treat men when men don't do exactly what I want. Or this is how I treat men when the men are being harmful in some way, shape, or form to me. Now, of course, those thoughts are not ringing through in her mind as it would the conscious line many years later. No, they're just the imprints that are taken in as patterning. And what conditions and patterns and repatterns the subconscious mind is emotion, especially intense emotion, and repetition. And anytime heavy emotion, repetition happens with consistency, you are programming that child. What begins as a subconscious, unhealed bleeding wound in a child today becomes tomorrow's angsty, rebellious behavior of a teenager, which becomes the repeated, chaotic mistakes of heartache and trouble of a young adult. Finally, and in the full-grown adult's inability to pick up the broken pieces of their life. I see it every day. And so do you. Because what happens in childhood doesn't stay in childhood. It echoes. It reverberates out into relationships, into self-worth, into identity. Children raised in emotionally unstable environments often grow into teenagers and then adults who struggle with boundaries. They feel responsible for others' emotions. They confuse intensity with love. Hello. They fear abandonment and not expect it. And they stay in this tragic push and pull pattern with a love and a person they just cannot seem to get right. And the tragedy is, they often recreate the very dynamics that hurt them, not because they want to, but because it's what their subconscious recognizes as familiar. Patterns. But here's the truth that gives us hope. These patterns are not permanent. Awareness, the first step in any healing journey. Awareness changes everything. When we begin to see what was modeled to us, we gain the power to choose differently. For that parent, it means accountability, healing, learning how to regulate your emotions. For the child, especially later in life, it means unlearning what was really never theirs to begin with. And the process is difficult and long, but worth every minute. And we see these bleeding emotional wounds in Taykota, both of them bleeding out onto each other, and then eventually their peers in their friend group. But this isn't about condemnation. Yes, we can condemn the behavior, especially when it is of this volatile and violent nature. Can and it should be. But what begins as a condemnation of problematic behavior can eventually lead to the compassion that is necessary for the healing. That time as a child is precious for many reasons. But we have to know and understand that our words and behavior around these children matter. And not just once they're teenagers, not just once they're able to remember things at 7 years old, always, a whole way through. That subconscious mind is a sponge and it's taking in the words, the behavior. And we don't, one day, want to find out the heartbreaking and damaging words used in a moment of weakness and anger and fighting to be said just a few years later by our children. And so we see that the way that we conduct ourselves around our children at any age, at all ages, matters. The way that we speak, the way that we act, what we say, it all matters. The environment, what it looks like, what it feels like, what the environments are like that we take them to, bring them up in, schools, peers. It all matters. It all plays a part in their psyche as they move through life. And the behaviors we exhibit today will become the behaviors that we deal with tomorrow. And so I know there's a lot of cultural heaviness right now, and this is a heavy topic. And so if you're still here with me, thank you for being here, for listening, participating in this. And I would love to hear from you in the comments what you think about these things. Did you already know all of this? Is any of this new? Is this helpful? Should I lean into something a little, make it a little more clear, or make something a little more, expound on something, let me know. I would love to hear from you. And, let's please keep the comments to the subject at hand and not turn it into a this team, that team battle. We want to promote a consciousness under unity here, because contrary to what the internet and socials would tell us today, we are better and stronger together. And so let's have the conversation. I'd love to hear from you. Let me know what you think. Be kind, be respectful, and let me know if there's anything that you would like me to expand on here. As always, I thank you for being here. Take care of yourselves and your little ones, if you have them or you're around them. They matter. It all matters. Take care.